In part 2 of our series on our contributor app, we want to talk about some of the advanced features that you can use when you're connecting this app back to a Switchblade at the studio. And this involves being able to pass SLIOs back and forth. And SLIOs are software-defined logic I/O, which is really a WheatNet term for passing virtual closures back and forth to each other. This app gives us the ability to assign closures to buttons and then pass those back to the Switchblade at the studio, and then out of the Switchblade we can pass that back to NexGen, or we can have it trigger salvos to switch audio being fed to us, so on and so forth. So let's take a look at the XML file we're using here for Milwaukee and take a look at our high school sports Switchblade connection. In this case, it's connecting back to a Switchblade module, and then we've gone ahead and assigned some signal buttons. Signal buttons are basically buttons. We got a couple of parameters that we can assign for each of these buttons, and we can have up to 8 buttons assigned for each different connection, and it can be 8 different buttons for each different connection. It doesn't have to be the same buttons for each connection. They can all be changed based upon the connection that's chosen. So in this case, we've assigned several buttons, and let's take a look. Legend is basically the text that's going to appear on the button. The SLIO is basically the SLIO that is assigned to the button, and they need to be in sequential order. So it's essentially, in this case, we're starting at 61, and you'll see they proceed up through 67 in sequential order. And then the appearance, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, is really just the button color. So in this case, we've assigned several buttons. We've called them Switchblade on air, legal ID, spot block, end of game. These are all commands that are going to go back to NexGen. And then we've assigned a couple of different choices for what we're going to hear for Switchblade to feed back to us. So in this case, the program feed, the air feed, and if we scroll down a little bit more, the WRNW air feed, which is the other sports station, just in case we needed to listen to that for whatever reason while we're connected. So we've defined those, so let's look and see how they appear in the app. So we're going to click on the high school sports connection. We're going to make that connection, and now we're going to see that those buttons now appear in our app. Let's put it on top so we can take a look. So we got the spot block, and the appearance 3 is red. Down below we've got legal ID. Appearance 2 is orange. If we got the program feed down here, appearance number 1 is green, so on and so forth. So we've defined all of these in the XML file. The app has loaded the XML file and has loaded those variables in. So now that we've made the connection, it has established these buttons for us. And we can hear that we've got the audio coming back. We'll revisit that again later. But first, let's go ahead and confirm that the SLIOs are making it back to the Switchblade connection at the studio. So we're connected here on module number 3. For moving SLIOs back and forth, we can use anything 51 through 128. Everything below that, 50 and below, is used for status indication and some other background stuff based upon each of the 24 modules that are connected. So in this case, we went into module 3, we said we're going to pass SLIOs, and we said we were going to pass SLIO 61 through 70, and we assigned them to this module. So now, as we're looking at the app, and let's click spot block, for example, we see that appears on 61, our legal ID is on 62, our Switchblade on air is on 63, our end of game is on 64, our different program feeds are on 65, 6, and 7. So we've confirmed that they're all getting back. So let's now go see what we can do with these SLIOs now that they are appearing on the Switchblade back at the studio. We'll start with NexGen. We've got another video series and some written documentation on how to assign SLIOs within NexGen. So let's quickly look and see that for our station that we're using here, which is our test station, dev aserv, we've gone ahead and taken SLIOs 60, 61, 62, and 63 and assigned them to opto events for this station within NexGen. So what this is going to do is when we trigger the legal ID here, it's going to go ahead and trigger SLIO 62, which is going to trigger the legal ID when we trigger the spot block, and it triggers SLIO 61. NexGen is going to pick that up and trigger the next spot block. Macro 1 and Macro 2 are defined as Switchblade on air or our end of game. So it's really nothing more than just taking closures and assigning them in NexGen, which many of you are already familiar with. In this case, they're just virtual closures instead of physical closures. So let's say we're getting ready to do a game. We've connected to Switchblade. We've got our monitor here. And we're going to go ahead and turn that on. And we want to hear the WOKY air feed because we're doing this game on WOKY. We'll just pretend that this is WOKY. So we go ahead and click this, and this did a route change within WheatNet. And we'll look at that shortly. But the first thing we want to do is we see we're plotting along currently in auto mode. Let's say we want to go ahead and put the Switchblade on air, and we'll just say it's wired up to an ACU1 source. We can look at our sources here. In this case, we only have 2 sources for this station. But if we go ahead and do the Switchblade on air macro, we've now switched sources. NexGen's put itself into satellite mode. We could have told the macro to do a fade and go on this song that's playing as well, but for demonstration purposes, I'm not sure we really had to get that fancy. But let's go ahead and look at a couple other things we can do. So we're doing the game. We've decided now, instead of the air feed, we want to get the program feed. So we go ahead and click that button. That creates a route change in WheatNet. We'll look at that in just a minute. So now we're only getting the audio that's being fed back to us. And let's go ahead and say we want to do a legal ID during the game. So we go ahead and press our legal ID. That triggers the SLIO, which then triggers the appropriate legal ID or liner within NexGen. If we go ahead and put a spot block in the log, which we would have during our game, we're doing the game, we're going to take a break, we're going to hit our spot block closure, it goes ahead and fires that spot block. You can add others for maybe a liner A or a liner B or whatever the case may be. And when we've gotten to the end of the game, we go ahead and press our end of game button, and this just triggers a macro to go ahead and put the station back in auto mode. And now we're back to playing our log. So again, we can have up to 8 buttons, and we can assign them to do, whatever we want within NexGen by simply using opto closures and tying the opto closures we're sending from here to opto closures in NexGen, and we can do completely automated ball games or remotes or whatever the case may be. Now, we talked about listening to different audio feeds. Here we're listening to WRNW. Now we hit that button and we're listening to WOKY. So we can make those changes by simply taking the SLIOs and then tying them back to basically salvo changes within WheatNet. So if we jump over here and take a look at our WheatNet, basically what we're doing is we're connected to module 3 on the Switchblade, and we're just changing the cross point. So if we go ahead and look, we got nothing cross-pointed here. If we take the air feed and hop over here, our cross point is now here. If we go ahead and take the WOKY air feed, it's now moved over here. And the way we're doing that, if you're not familiar with WheatNet, is we're basically just creating salvos and then tying those salvos to SLIOs. So we went ahead and created these salvos here called Switchblade 27 OKY, Switchblade 27 R&W. And then we just went into our Switchblade, and if you go into the LIO info tab, click to expand and scroll down, by looking at LIO 65, 66, and 67, which we defined earlier in our XML file that we're sending back through the app, 65 and 66 and 67, by simply finding that SLIO on our Switchblade and double-clicking here where it says Fire Salvo, we can choose an existing salvo. And then when we fire the SLIO remotely on the app, when that SLIO is triggered, it then fires this salvo within WheatNet, and then that allows us to then change what we're listening to on demand through the app. So if you're at a remote location and you connect and you don't necessarily know what's set to feed back to the remote talent, you can go ahead and define within the XML a selection of choices based upon salvos within WheatNet that they can listen to. You can go a step further and you can map SLIOs to physical LIO closures, and you can create buttons that then create a physical closure to a profanity delay. You can have a light that toggles in the studio to notify somebody. There's a number of different options. Anything you can do with a relay closure, you can assign to these buttons and then assign them in software within WheatNet or NexGen or out to a physical closure, whatever the case may be. But again, this is done connecting using this app only to Switchblade. Connecting to Switchblade enables the use of the buttons and then passing the SLIOs back and forth, which is essentially some enhanced capability as opposed to just a straight audio connection from the app back to the studio.